Welcome back. Now let's look at some additional terminology. The following terms are equally important to understanding poetry and analysis of literature, including prose. They are, however, not tied directly to sound, image, or symbol. Theme: the idea of a literary work abstracted from its details of language, character, and action, and cast in the form of a generalization. It is, in other terms, the underlying meaning of the story. Convention: a customary feature of a literary work, such as the use of a chorus in Greek tragedy, the inclusion of an explicit moral in a fable, or the use of a particular rhyme scheme in a villanelle. Literary conventions are defining features of a particular literary genre, such as novel, short story, ballad, sonnet, or play. Diction: the selection of words in a literary work. A work's diction forms one of its centrally important literary elements, as writers use words to convey action, reveal character, imply attitudes, identify themes, and suggest values. We can speak of the diction particular to a character, as in Iago and Desdemona's very different ways of speaking in Othello. We can also refer to a poet's diction, as represented over the body of his or her work, as in Donne's or Hugh's diction. Denotation: the dictionary meaning of a word. Writers typically play off a word's denotative meaning against its connotations or suggested and implied associational implications. In the following lines from Peter Munch's Advice to My Son, the references to flowers and fruit, bread and wine denote specific things, but also suggest something beyond the literal dictionary meaning of the words. To be specific, between the peony and rose, plant squash and spinach, turnips and tomatoes. Beauty is nectar, and nectar in a desert saves. And always serve bread with your wine, but son, always serve wine. Connotation: the associations called up by a word that goes beyond its dictionary meaning. Poets especially tend to use words rich in connotation. Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night includes intensely connotative language, as in these lines: Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. He could have chosen to use the word fight instead of rage, but rage has a deeper connotative meaning. Dialogue: the conversation of characters in a literary work. In fiction, dialogue is typically enclosed within quotation marks. In plays, characters' speech is preceded by their names. In poetry, we don't often see dialogue, but in some cases it is included. Fiction: an imagined story, whether in prose, poetry, or drama. Ibsen's Nora is fictional, a make-believe character in a play, as are Hamlet and Othello. Character like Robert Browning's Duke and Duchess from his poem My Last Duchess are fictional as well, though they may be based on actual historical individuals. And of course, characters in stories and novels are fictional, though they too may be based in some way on real people. The important thing to remember is that writers embellish and embroider and alter actual life when they use real life as the basis for their work. They fictionalize the facts and deviate from the real life situation as they make things up. Hyperbole: hyperbole is a figure of speech involving exaggeration. John Donne uses hyperbole in his poem Song, Go and Catch a Falling Star. One cannot truly catch a falling star. Irony: a contrast or discrepancy between what is said and what is meant, or between what happens and what is expected to happen in life and in literature. In verbal irony, characters say the opposite of what they mean. In irony of circumstance or situation, the opposite of what is expected occurs. In dramatic irony, a character speaks in ignorance of a situation or event known to the audience or to the other characters. Flannery O'Connor's short stories employ all these forms of irony, as does Poe's Cask of Amontillado. You might be familiar with the late-night work of Stephen Colbert. He often is ironic in his comments. Literal language. A form of language in which writers and speakers mean exactly what their words denote. Narrator. The voice and implied speaker of a fictional work to be distinguished from the actual living author. For example, the narrator of Joyce's Araby is not James Joyce himself, but a literary fictional character created expressly to tell the story. Faulkner's A Rose for Emily contains a communal narrator identified only as we. In a poem, the poet is not necessarily the narrator, although he or she might be in some instances. Point of view. The angle of vision from which a story is narrated. A work's point of view can be first person, in which the narrator is a character or an observer, respectively. Objective, in which the narrator knows or appears to know no more than the reader. Omniscient, in which the narrator knows everything about all of the characters. And limited omniscient, which allows the narrator to know some things about the characters, but not everything. Style. Style is the way in which an author chooses words, arranges them in sentences or in lines of dialogue or verse, and develops ideas and actions with description, imagery, and other literary techniques. Tone. The implied attitude of a writer toward the subject and characters of a work, as for example Flannery O'Connor's ironic tone in her Good Country People. Satire. A literary work that criticizes human misconduct and ridicules vices, stupidities, and follies. Swift's Gulliver's Travels is a famous example. Chekhov's Marriage Proposal and O'Connor's Everything That Rises Must Converge have strong satirical elements. You might be familiar with Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. Both of these men practice satire. Understatement. A figure of speech in which a writer or speaker says less than what he or she means. It is the opposite of exaggeration. For example, the last line of Frost's Birches illustrates this literary device. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. This is the end of Part 1's literary terminology. Let's review. You've been given quite a few terms that are separate from those that deal with sound and image. Many of these terms can apply to poetry or prose. Some of these terms are familiar and some are entirely new. You should take time to review the material online and using traditional study methods. When you are ready, continue to the next set of terms. Assessments. The summative assessment for this unit will include a multiple-choice quiz with definitions and examples. The examples you will be asked to identify might or might not be the same as examples given in the notes. This will require you to have the knowledge available for recall and to be able to apply that knowledge to new material.